The world of the late Cretaceous was vibrant, filled with towering forests, vast inland seas, and the thunderous presence of giant reptiles that had ruled the Earth for over 150 million years. Dinosaurs of every size roamed the land, from the colossal titans that grazed on vegetation to the swift hunters that stalked their prey. Pterosaurs still commanded the skies, while mosasaurs and plesiosaurs dominated the oceans. Life had reached a peak of diversity and strength, a true age of giants. Yet in the silence of space, a force beyond imagination was already on its way, destined to end this dynasty in a single devastating moment. "66 million years ago, a mountain-sized asteroid, roughly 10 kilometers across, tore through the void of space on a collision course with Earth. Traveling at more than 20 times the speed of sound, it carried an energy greater than billions of nuclear bombs combined. In an instant, the fate of the dinosaurs and nearly all life on the planet was sealed. The asteroid slammed into the shallow waters near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater. The force of impact was so immense that it vaporized rock, sent molten debris high into the atmosphere, and triggered earthquakes felt across the globe. Within seconds, a shockwave of unimaginable power raced outward, flattening forests, scorching everything in its path, and igniting wildfires that spread for thousands of kilometers. In that single moment, the age of the dinosaurs began to unravel. The oceans near the impact site boiled as tsunamis taller than skyscrapers surged across coastlines. Vast waves swept away marine life, erasing entire ecosystems in minutes. Even far from the epicenter, the seas heaved and churned with violent energy, drowning the coasts of continents and tearing apart coral reefs and shallow water habitats. The marine reptiles that had thrived in these waters suddenly found themselves in chaos, their world collapsing in terrifying force. On land, the effects were no less catastrophic. The initial blast incinerated everything within hundreds of kilometers, turning jungles into wastelands of ash. Massive trees were snapped like twigs, and animals caught in the open stood no chance. Even the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex, the apex predator of its time, could not outrun the wall of destruction. Across North America and beyond, herds of hadrosaurs and ceratopsians were thrown into panic, their cries drowned out by the deafening roar of the Earth itself tearing apart. As debris from the impact was blasted into the upper atmosphere, it rained back down in fiery showers. The skies lit up with millions of streaks of molten rock, igniting wildfires that spread across continents. Much of the planet became an inferno, with vast regions burning uncontrollably. The very air became dangerous, filled with soot, smoke, and toxic gases that suffocated creatures struggling to breathe. Oxygen levels plummeted, and the once clear skies of the Cretaceous turned into a canvas of red and black. But the devastation was not limited to fire and water. As the asteroid's energy rippled through the planet, it triggered earthquakes of unprecedented magnitude. Entire mountain ranges trembled, rivers shifted, and volcanic systems were destabilized. Lava flows spilled into valleys, compounding the destruction already unleashed by the impact. The ground itself became hostile, refusing to offer safety to those seeking shelter. The most far-reaching effect, however, was yet to come. Billions of tons of vaporized rock and sulfur were hurled into the stratosphere, spreading across the globe. This layer of dust and ash began to block out the sun, plunging the world into a twilight that would last for months, even years. The lush landscapes that had once nourished dinosaurs and countless other creatures now fell under a dark and chilling shadow. Photosynthesis slowed, then ceased. The foundations of the food chain began to collapse. For the mighty herbivores, food became scarce, and with their decline, the predators that depended on them also began to falter. The final hour of the dinosaurs was not a single moment, but a cascade of disasters set in motion by the asteroid's strike. Within days, much of the world was on fire. Seas had risen in destructive waves, and skies were shrouded in darkness. Across continents, the once dominant dinosaurs found themselves in a world that had turned against them. Their size, once a mark of strength, now became a liability, as massive bodies demanded more resources than the collapsing ecosystems could provide. While some individuals may have survived the initial catastrophe, the chain of events that followed left little chance for recovery. As silence settled over the Earth in the wake of destruction, the Cretaceous world gasped its last breaths. The giant reptiles that had defined an era were facing the end of their reign. What had once been a thriving planet of life and energy now trembled under the weight of devastation, fire, and darkness. It was a moment that would reshape the course of evolution forever. The firestorms and tsunamis were only the beginning. As the last embers of the global inferno smoldered, a deeper catastrophe unfolded in silence above. In the thin air of the stratosphere, billions of tons of pulverized rock, soot, and sulfuric aerosols spread like a shroud. The Earth's blue skies dimmed into a permanent twilight. What sunlight managed to pierce the haze was weak and filtered, casting the planet in an eerie, cold glow. Day and night blurred, and the warmth of the sun vanished from the surface of the Earth. Temperatures plummeted rapidly. Regions that once basked in humid Cretaceous heat now shivered under a chill more like a harsh winter. Plants that relied on sunlight withered within weeks. Forests, already burned from the fires, failed to regrow. Prairies and lush river valleys turned barren. In the oceans, the collapse was just as severe. Phytoplankton, the microscopic plants that formed the base of the marine food web, died off in staggering numbers as photosynthesis halted. Without them, the creatures that fed on them, krill, mollusks, and small fish, struggled. As these populations fell, the predators above them began to starve. The food chains across Earth crumbled with frightening speed. On land, giant herbivores such as Triceratops and Hadrosaurs faced an impossible challenge. They needed tons of vegetation to sustain themselves, but there was none left to eat. Herds that once filled plains dwindled to starving remnants. The predators that hunted them, including the mighty Tyrannosaurus, turned desperate. Some scavenged, picking at carcasses left from the initial destruction. But even these dwindled as decomposition slowed in the cold and fires consumed much of the biomass. For apex predators, the world had become a graveyard with nothing left to claim. Acid rain poured from the skies as the sulfur from the impact mixed with water vapor, searing leaves, poisoning rivers, and making survival even harder for those already clinging to life. Lakes and shallow seas turned toxic, suffocating fish and amphibians. Ecosystems unraveled not in centuries or decades, but in mere years. It was as if the Earth had entered a new geological epoch overnight, one ruled by silence and scarcity. The oceans, once rich with life, fell into darkness as sunlight could no longer penetrate their depths. Coral reefs collapsed. Ammonites, coiled shelled relatives of squid, vanished forever. Marine reptiles, already battered by the tsunamis, found their prey disappearing. Mosasaurs, the apex predators of the seas, starved in empty waters. Plesiosaurs and other giants of the oceans followed the same fate, disappearing into extinction. Only a few small adaptable species, fish that could scavenge detritus, crustaceans that lived off the sea floor, persisted in this hostile new environment. On land, the silence grew unbearable. Vast forests once filled with the cries of dinosaurs, the flutter of wings and the croaks of amphibians now echoed with nothing. The long darkness lasted for months, stretching into years. Those who had survived the initial blast were now trapped in a dying world. Dinosaurs, despite their dominance, were creatures adapted to abundance. Their enormous size, their specialized diets, their dependence on stable climates, all turned against them in this new age of scarcity. It was not just one disaster that ended them, but the relentless chain of disasters set into motion by the asteroid's strike. Mammals, small and resourceful, found their moment in the darkness. Burrowing creatures huddled underground, insulated from the worst of the cold. Omnivores picked at seeds, insects, and whatever scraps remained, needing far less than the giants who had once ruled the Earth. Crocodiles, shielded in swamps and rivers, endured the cooling climate, feeding opportunistically on what remained. Birds, descendants of small theropod dinosaurs, found ways to adapt, surviving on seeds and insects, holding on to a lineage that would one day reclaim the skies. But for the great dinosaurs, the end was near. Each passing year without sunlight, each season without food, marked another step toward extinction. The long darkness was not just a physical shadow, but a symbolic one, closing the final chapter on their reign. The Earth had shifted violently, and nature was rewriting its story. This was no longer the age of dinosaurs. It was the dawn of something else, born from suffering, shaped by survival, and destined to inherit the empty world left behind. The dinosaurs had survived countless challenges before. They had endured changing climates, shifting continents, and volcanic upheavals. Their dynasty stretched for over 150 million years, longer than mammals or even flowering plants had existed. But the asteroid changed everything. It was not a single blow, but a cascade of disasters that stripped the Earth of its giants piece by piece until their mighty footsteps vanished forever. In the shadow of the impact, the vast herds of herbivores began to disappear. Creatures like Triceratops, Ankylosaurs and Hadrosaurs, once so plentiful across the plains of North America, could not find enough food. Forests had burned to ash, prairies shriveled, and plants withered without sunlight. Their massive bodies, adapted for abundance, now demanded more than the dying world could provide. Starvation swept across the land, and the great herds collapsed. Where once hundreds of hadrosaurs roamed together, only a handful staggered through the dust-choked silence, weakened and doomed. Predators fared no better. Tyrannosaurus rex, once the undisputed ruler of the land, faced a world where prey had become scarce. Its keen sense of smell could track carcasses for miles, but as time passed, there were fewer bodies left to scavenge. Packs of smaller carnivores, once thriving in the shadows of giants, turned on each other in desperation. The delicate balance of predator and prey unraveled in months, not millennia. Hunger became the great equalizer, sparing no species, no matter how powerful. In the skies, the fate of the pterosaurs mirrored that of their terrestrial cousins. For millions of years, they had soared across oceans and continents, from the tiny anurognathids that flitted like bats to the colossal Quetzalcoatlus with wingspans greater than a small plane. But they too depended on the abundance of fish, insects, and small animals. As oceans emptied and forests fell silent, their skies became empty. The largest pterosaurs, unable to adapt to the scarcity, vanished completely. Only their distant relatives, the small feathered birds, clung on to survival, carrying the last legacy of flight from the age of reptiles into the future. Beneath the waves, the oceans faced their own apocalypse. Mosasaurs, apex predators of the seas, had thrived on schools of fish and ammonites. Now they found themselves in barren waters. Plesiosaurs, elegant hunters with long necks or massive jaws, succumbed in the same way. Ammonites themselves, once numbering in endless variety, disappeared in the darkness. Entire lineages that had dominated the oceans for tens of millions of years ended abruptly, leaving behind only their fossil shells as evidence of their former glory. Some dinosaurs may have lingered longer in isolated pockets of the world, surviving months or even years after the impact. But survival was no longer enough. The chain of life had broken, and each link dragged the next into oblivion. Even the smaller species of dinosaurs, those that seemed more adaptable, could not withstand the cold, the famine, and the relentless pressure of a world reshaped by disaster. Their eggs, once laid in the warmth of fertile soil, now failed in barren ground. Their young, once nurtured in herds, starved before they could grow. Generation by generation, their chances dwindled to nothing. The fall of the dinosaurs was not dramatic in every corner of the world. In some places, it was a slow fading. Herds grew smaller, calls of great predators grew rarer, ecosystems thinned until silence replaced sound. In others, it was sudden and violent, firestorms consuming entire regions, seas boiling with tsunamis, skies raining with molten debris. Whether quick or gradual, the end came all the same. An empire built over millions of years dissolved in only a few thousand, an instant in the scale of deep time. For the reptiles that ruled the oceans, for the pterosaurs that ruled the skies, and for the dinosaurs that ruled the land, the age of giants was finished. The earth itself had turned against them, and no power, no adaptation could reverse the tide. Extinction was final. What remained were their smaller relatives, the birds, and a few survivors clinging to niches of survival. From that moment forward, the dinosaurs would live only in stone and memory. In the silence left behind by the fall of the giants, the world seemed empty. Forests that had once shaken with the footsteps of herds now stood still, charred and barren. Oceans that had roared with the power of mosasaurs now rolled quietly, their surface disturbed only by the winds of a cooling planet. But extinction, while merciless, does not erase everything. In the cracks of devastation, in the shadows of destruction, life endured. Not the mighty, not the massive, but the small, the adaptable, the overlooked. The survivors of the catastrophe would inherit the earth, not by strength, but by resilience. Among them were the mammals, tiny and unassuming. For over 100 million years, they had lived in the shadows of dinosaurs, rarely growing larger than a modern cat. They had survived by burrowing, by hunting at night, and by eating almost anything they could find: seeds, insects, roots, and carrion. When the asteroid plunged the world into darkness, these strategies became their salvation. Safe in burrows, sheltered from fire and cold, mammals could wait out the worst of the catastrophe. Their varied diets allowed them to find sustenance, even when the food web above had collapsed. While the giants starved, these small creatures managed to cling to life. Birds, descendants of small theropod dinosaurs, were another lineage that survived. Not all made it through the larger, specialized species vanished, but some small ground-dwelling birds endured. Many had the ability to feed on seeds, which could survive long after plants had died. Their mobility gave them an advantage, allowing them to escape pockets of disaster and seek refuge in less devastated regions. Though they were fragile compared to the soaring pterosaurs that once ruled the skies, their adaptability ensured that flight would not vanish from the earth. Crocodiles, ancient predators that had lived alongside dinosaurs for millions of years, weathered the catastrophe as well. Their semi-aquatic lifestyle insulated them from some of the worst effects. Able to feed on whatever they could scavenge: fish, carrion, or smaller animals they endured in swamps, rivers, and coastlines. Their slow metabolisms allowed them to survive long stretches without food, a key advantage in a world where scarcity was the new reality. Though much of their world had been erased, they persisted, ancient and patient as they had through earlier extinctions. Insects, resilient and prolific, also survived in staggering numbers. Scavengers and decomposers thrived on the remains of the dead, breaking down what the fires and famine left behind. Their persistence not only kept them alive, but also provided food for the creatures that depended on them, creating small but stable chains of survival in an otherwise broken world. The hum of insects became one of the first sounds to return to the silent landscapes after the fires dimmed and the skies began to clear. Amphibians too endured. Frogs, salamanders, and their kin, many of which lived in aquatic or semi-aquatic environments, found refuge in lakes and streams. Their ability to hibernate, to wait out harsh conditions, allowed them to survive when larger creatures could not. Their fragile bodies might have seemed unlikely to withstand such upheaval, yet they persisted, proving that survival was not always about strength, but about patience and endurance. The pattern of survival revealed a truth. It was not the rulers of the Cretaceous who inherited the Earth, but those prepared for hardship. Generalists thrived while specialists vanished. The massive and the mighty fell, while the small, the adaptable, and the resourceful endured. Mammals, birds, crocodiles, insects, and amphibians became the seeds of the future, each carrying forward a piece of life into a new age. In the wake of devastation, they emerged into a planet forever changed. The dinosaurs were gone, but life itself had not been extinguished. It had simply taken a new shape, retreating into resilience, preparing for a new chapter. The survivors did not know it, but they were the ancestors of all that would follow the rise of new predators, the growth of new forests, and eventually, the emergence of humanity itself. When the skies finally began to clear and the dust of the asteroid impact settled, the Earth revealed a new face. The world that had once belonged to dinosaurs was gone. The forests that returned were different, the oceans carried new life, and the silence left by the fall of giants was slowly replaced by the sounds of smaller, emerging survivors. This was not a return to what once was, but the birth of something entirely new. Plants were the first to reclaim the earth. Ferns spread quickly across charred landscapes, carpeting the ground where forests had once stood tall. In time, flowering plants returned, taking advantage of the open space left by the destruction. They grew in vast numbers, spreading their seeds across continents, reshaping ecosystems. These new plants would feed the creatures that remained, offering the foundation for life to rise once more. With the dinosaurs gone, mammals stepped into a world of opportunity. No longer confined to the shadows, they began to diversify. Species that had once been small and shrew-like evolved into larger forms, exploring new roles in the ecosystem. Some became grazers, others predators, and many adapted to climbing, burrowing, or swimming. Their adaptability allowed them to spread across every environment, filling the gaps left behind by the extinction. Within a few million years, mammals would grow into creatures larger and more complex than any of their ancestors could have imagined. Birds, too, flourished. Their ancestors had survived by being small and resourceful, but now they expanded into new forms. Some grew larger and filled the skies with wings once again, while others adapted to life on the ground or in water. The age of birds had begun, and their songs replaced the cries of the pterosaurs that once soared above. They became the heirs of flight, shaping the skies in ways the dinosaurs never could. The oceans also transformed. Though mosasaurs and plesiosaurs were gone, the seas did not remain empty for long. Fish diversified rapidly, taking advantage of the collapse of marine reptiles. Sharks, survivors of countless extinctions, rose again as apex predators, shaping marine ecosystems that persist to this day. From the shallows to the deep, the oceans filled with new life, different from the past, yet vibrant with energy. The Earth's recovery was not immediate. It took thousands of years for ecosystems to stabilize, millions for new forms of life to dominate. But the resilience of survival ensured that life would not only return, but thrive in astonishing ways. Each species that endured carried the potential for the future, and together they created a planet both scarred by disaster and brimming with possibility. The legacy of the asteroid was paradoxical. It had ended an empire, but it had also cleared the path for another. Without it, the dinosaurs might have continued their reign indefinitely. Mammals might never have risen beyond small nocturnal creatures, and primates, let alone humans, might never have walked the Earth. The catastrophe was both an ending and a beginning, a moment that reshaped the destiny of the planet. In the grand scale of time, extinction is both inevitable and transformative. It destroys, but it also creates. From the ruins of the Cretaceous world rose a new age, one that would eventually give birth to the modern Earth we know today. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs did not kill life, it redirected it. It set the stage for the rise of mammals, the eventual emergence of humanity, and the civilizations that now look back to that day as one of the most pivotal in history. The world after the asteroid was quieter, stranger, and emptier, but it was also full of potential. The survivors, small and overlooked, inherited the planet. They built new ecosystems, forged new paths of evolution, and carried life into the future. And so, from the ashes of destruction, a new world rose, proving once more that even in the darkest hours, life finds a way.